Hi, everybody. You're watching Expressive Photography. I'm Alister Benn, and this is Adam Gibbs.
Hello. Sorry about
We're off to a great start, as per usual. Um, Instead of the usual kind of vision and light talk, we're going to go straight into one of the sort of heavy hitting topics right now. And this is going to be the way the show is going to move forward, getting people on to talk about specific topics. So this week, Adam and I are going to be talking about, is AI going to be the death of landscape photography?
that. Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Yes. And thank you for tuning in. So, Adam and I are going to be talking about all sorts of various aspects of it, and hopefully you'll find it enjoyable. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. Great. It's only 6 weeks since we saw each other last, so it's
I
not too
know.
too long, and we're
Yeah.
missing you already.
Really?
Yeah, for
I
sure.
wish the feeling was mutual.
Me too. Um, Now, talking of workshops, because obviously I'm going to be coming over again in the spring of 24. We're going to do some more
Yes.
workshops together on the island. And of course, you and I are also going to be hooking up to do some workshops again in the north coast of Spain in January. So before we get into the AI chat, I just wanted to mention that we do have a couple of spots left. We've got two workshops in the north coast of Spain. All the details are on the website. Click the link below and you'll find all that information. If you want to hang out with Adam and me, and you can tell just what a lovely guy he is and soft and fluffy.
Plus the Spanish coastline is pretty epic, I must admit. It's probably the most epic coastline that I've seen, so well worth the trip.
I think the
That
fact
was
that
my
on the
first
last
time
work,
last year.
yeah, that's right. I think the fact that on the two workshops we ran there this year, we didn't see another photographer outside of our group in three
No,
weeks. Which, for saying
no.
how incredibly epic the coastline is, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, if you want an opportunity to join Adam and I, then please click on the link and hopefully we'll see one of you or two of you out there in January. Okay, so AI is very much on the it's one of the main topics of conversation now. We're seeing some of the big players like Photoshop are now bringing in a beta version where AI, generative AI, is being incorporated into the software. Lightroom has been using the new denoise AI, as are many of the other software companies. So AI is it's everywhere now in terms of content and in terms of software. So what Adam and I are planning on talking about for the next maybe 25 minutes or so, it's not going to be horribly long, is what is this going to, or how is this going to impact photographers? So Adam, any initial thoughts on this? What's your kind of gut feeling on just the whole topic?
Well, it's kind of like when Photoshop first came out. A lot of people thought it was the end of photography as we saw it, and it basically all it did was just change the way that people process their images. I think that the only concern that I have, I mean, some industries should be concerned, but we can get into that later. But the only concern that I have is that, and it was the same with Photoshop as well when it first came out, is that are we as a nature photographer, are we representing what's really out there? And I'm a true believer in trying to represent what I see on what I'm photographing to the truest nature possible. Now, sure, I clone things out and I'm changing colors and such, but I try to represent it the best I can so that it actually exists, something that actually exists. And the problem that I see with AI is that as soon as we start manipulating things to the point where it's a fantasy of what's in our mind rather than something that's actually existing, I think it gives people the false sense of what's out there when it really isn't out there, if that makes sense.
Mm.
I do think that people are getting more and more detached from the natural world. And if we represent it in this fantasy way, then people have this false sense of, oh, isn't it beautiful? It's amazing out there. When in fact, it isn't. Things are changing rapidly because of a number of issues. And so that's my only concern. People say, well, it's art, you can do anything. Well, that's true, and nature photography is no different, but I'm coming from it from a point of conservation. That's my only real big concern, really.
Yeah, and I think, that's always valid, and I think one of the reasons you and I have been hanging out for so many years is that we share our concerns about the natural world and the conservation of the natural world. So I agree on that regard. But I think AI comes in all sorts of different flavors, So something, I mean, most of us are using AI already to some degree.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
the reason, I'm just going to change one thing. I've got a bass guitar sticking out the back of my neck. My wife will go mad when it comes to the edit.
I got a photograph here. There we go.
Um, we're all I mean, the reason so many of us shoot with our phones, when we're out, we're shooting with our phones all the time. The reason the photos look so great is because of AI. They're being processed in the phone, and they're coming out looking incredible. And then we make them with our big camera, and it all looks a bit rubbish in comparison. But even things like, Lightroom are now using denoise, the artificial intelligence version of denoise, and obviously
Hmm.
Topaz software has been using that for quite a few years. So Topaz brought in quite a few AI products. I think it was the last 2 or 3 years ago. They did the Gigapixel AI, they did Sharpen AI, and then the Denoise AI. And all three of those products use AI to analyze the images and reduce noise where the noise is most, and the way it's dealing with textures and details. So there's obviously, I think most people kind of welcome those types of products because it's just a better way of reducing noise on an image, for example, or upscaling an image if you need to make a bigger print. So I think there's always going to be the things that are useful to us. Um, some of the smart software, the way it's analyzing the image to a certain extent. Because one of the things I'm realizing is that if you've spent 20 years using Lightroom, you get pretty good at it. You get pretty adept at that
Sure.
software. But I'd hate to think how many hours I've spent learning software and then getting good with software. And it's the same with Photoshop. The learning curve for some of these things, whether it's Tony Kuiper's luminosity masks or anything like that, the learning curve is steep and it takes you years to become super proficient. Someone like Nick Page is a good example of that, just so proficient with the tools. I don't think most people have the time or inclination to spend putting that time and effort into getting that good at something.
No,
So
no,
having a
and I think also, sorry.
no, no, carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think that from my experience, a lot of people like making or taking photographs, but when it comes to processing, I've met an awful lot of people that just don't want to spend time sitting behind a computer. So if you have AI do it for you, with a click of a button, and and it's good enough, then why not? I mean, why would you want to spend hours behind a computer if you don't enjoy it? So yeah, no, I think it's definitely a valid,
So yeah, I think
even if
we're
it
going to
did
be
it
on
in,
this.
I mean, even if it did it in the, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think we're going to be in this situation where there's a scale of these things that some of it's going to be useful to us, and it's up to us on an individual basis to decide which of it we want to use. I mean, obviously, the one you mentioned earlier on there was the generative AI stuff, where you're actively putting something into the scene that wasn't there. Sky
Hmm.
replacements, God beams, all of those types of things. But at the end of the day, I mean, putting in a starburst or some light rays or switching out a sky, the AI software is getting much better at that. We've all played with it, we've all
Yes.
experimented with it, just to see what it can do. And comparing to how it was back in like 2011 when we all started using luminosity masks, to do that same thing was a hard and laborious thing. So I think what again, sky replacements is a good example. People are doing that all the time already. That's not new.
Hmm.
It's just the tool for doing it has become better. And I think that's all that's really changed. I think the biggest, there's two things I think really. One is the generative AI where you're actively putting something into the scene that wasn't there, or the more something I haven't played with personally are these programs that you can build your own fantasy landscapes, photographic,
Hmm.
photorealistic landscapes using keywords and stuff. That is really, I think, probably the biggest threat that's perceived within the business side of the industry. Commercial
Hmm.
photographers, if someone wants a photograph of Mount Rundle or Mount Assiniboine, and they go up there and it's socked in with cloud, but the client wants it for tomorrow. Obviously producing something with AI is going to satisfy the client's needs, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I think that's one of those industries that would probably be threatened the most is commercial photography. But commercial photography for the longest time has been on a downward spiral, kind of like stock photography. I mean, stock photography is pretty much dead, and now you can have now your clients can just make their own photographs. They don't need a photographer. They can
Right,
just make their own images of their products quite easily. So why would you want a photographer?
right.
It doesn't take anybody. All you have to do is put in a few words, and I mean, it's still not awesome, but it's getting better really quickly. And
Yeah,
I can see this technology at some point you won't be able to tell the difference between what's real and what's not.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's been in
I think
movies.
also in yeah,
It's
I
obviously
think the
been
movie
used.
industry is going to have a hard time, definitely. But outdoor photography, I think it'll always be here because, as you and I know, it's not really about the photography. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about being outside, right? And that's what everybody loves. I mean, so AI can't replace that. I don't
No.
think, not yet anyway. Maybe
Yeah, I
with
mean the
VR, I don't
whole.
know.
Yeah, I mean I've never worn a pair of VR goggles, but I know plenty of people who do, and there's a definite. I mean, our kids are obviously more of a generation who are going to embrace that type of thing more readily than you and I will. Um, you know, I I kind of came into this whole conversation not really worried. Certainly, I'm not worried for my job. I mean, I know quite a few lecturers and professors at universities, and they're marking term papers, and they're getting essays and end of year papers in from students, and they're having to get really good at spotting the ones that have been written by AI.
Oh, really? Okay.
So people are just putting in their whole term papers in, and massive projects, and they just get the computer to write it for them. So I dare say, if to write a book about composition, I'd imagine AI could probably have a pretty good stab at that these days. So
Hmm.
I think there's a possibility that learning material might get created somehow by AI. So that's you out of a
Yeah.
job.
Well, I'm not much of a writer anyway. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, even with my YouTube videos, I have I can't remember the name of the company, but there is a place where you can just type in a bunch of words and it'll write up a title for you and
Right,
even a description. And I have tried it, and I think on one of my videos I did actually use it, but
right.
it's so generic and everything's wonderful and it was just I don't know it didn't sound
Like you.
it didn't sound it didn't sound like me. It wasn't sincere. it just did not sound sincere. I mean, it was just a bunch of keywords really that,
Yeah.
you know, um, and I think if everybody's using that technology, then everything's going to start looking the same after a while. It'll have the same kind of context. I don't know. There's just something about it. It doesn't have a human element to it
Right.
yet,
It's
but
going
I'm
to
sure
change
that's
so
coming.
fast. Yeah, it's going to change so fast.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, to me, to go back to that point, that in terms of heavily manipulated photography, we know that it's been in the public domain for what, at least 10 to 15 years already, maybe even more.
Maybe even longer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I was talking to Anne about this the other day. I remember the first digital camera I bought was in 2001, a little 2 megapixel point and shoot thing. And I was in Sydney Airport flying out to work, and I saw this digital photography magazine. I thought, oh, I'll grab a copy of that and read it on the plane. And every single article was how to replace skies and how to clone things out
Oh,
that you didn't want, And this is 2001. So 22 years ago,
hmm.
the teaching of digital photography was how to make your boring photos look better. And that was literally the first thing I learned how to do, was swapping a sky out, because it was like, well, that's what digital photography was at the time. I
Hmm.
put a poll on my community channel just yesterday, I think, and one of the guys came back and said that digital was the death of photography. Because I asked the question, will AI be the death of photography? And his opinion was that, digital photography was the death of photography. The and I think there's a certain element of truth in that. When I mean, you shot film for many, many years. I still shoot with my Hassie. Tom Heaton famously shoots a lot of film with his cameras, and there's something very different about that process than going out with a digital camera and making photographs. The whole act of, we used to make photographs that we were limited by the medium. Velvia had a certain dynamic range, it had a certain look, the way it handled color was a certain way. And obviously, if you were shooting slide film, you used to send it off, someone would process it and send it back to you. So the whole function of photography was a very, very different thing from what you and I go out and do today, where you're shooting raw files with these 100 megapixel Fuji GFX 100Ss, beautiful raw files, so much information in them in terms of shadows and highlights and what we want to do with them. So the way I see it now is that what we're actually processing is already quite a strong detachment away from what it would have been like, shooting Velvia, 20 years ago or even today.
Yeah. I certainly don't miss those days, though. I fully get why people are very much still into film and the whole process. I mean, it definitely is an art form. I mean, back when I was shooting film, it wasn't so much of an art form, but it did have this mystery behind it because there weren't as many photographers back
Right.
then. Because people were kind of afraid of film or afraid of using cameras because, and you'd walk around with a tripod and everybody think, well, you must be a professional.
Yeah.
But there isn't really much mystery behind film. It's just that you just have to be more careful with your exposures.
It was an expensive learning
But
curve.
but it never used to be. Film used to be really cheap,
True.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, now it is. But it seems to be more of an art form now, definitely.
Mm.
And I fully get why people are right into film, especially large format film or black and white. Uh, but the digital for me, yeah, I wouldn't go back to film. I have no interest in shooting film anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but the it's funny when I was going to college, I took a photography uh, course for a 2 year program, and at the end of the program, we had to write an essay on what we saw as the future of photography. And my essay, I thought I'm going to go all out there. I'm just going to say, I just went wild with it. And my prediction was that people would have chips in their heads, and all they'd have to do was think about what they wanted, and it would be produced. They could either print it or output it somehow.
Yeah.
And I remember the instructor at that time just thought it was just outlandish.
Yeah.
And, that was when was that, 93, I guess.
Right.
Well, fast forward, 30
30
years,
years.
and we're there. We're there, and it's like, it's not. It's quite bizarre.
I think,
So who knows where it'll go?
the other thing that's kind of in my mind at the moment is that, social media has changed photography more than anything else that I think. I mean, obviously the incredible surge of technology. I mean, the cameras we're using today versus the cameras we were using 20 years ago. I mean, those first digital DSLRs that we were buying back in like 2002, 3, 4, the surge in quality and technology that we have in this last 20 years has been unbelievable. And I think what's happening is that that hasn't changed photography that much. It's the technology, camera technology and lens technology, I don't think's had as much impact on photography as social media has had on photography. That's how I see it, is that society, you only have to look at the TV shows that people like to watch, reality TV, and everything's sensational and over the top. And social media glorifies the landscape. Social media rewards the people who glorify the landscape. They have the most followers, they have the most influence over communities. And I think really what's happening is that is the type of photography that got really popular. People wanted auroras over Kirkefell, or Milky Ways over Delicate Arch, and all of these things. But obviously, to make those photographs well and to make them believable, so first of all, to go to those places can be expensive. Making the photographs of that type is a really skilled job. To make it look good is a real effort. And that's the bar. People go out and buy 10 grand's worth of camera equipment because that's what they want. They're the photographs that they want to make, because they're, a lot of them are really incredible. Some really beautiful things that you can go and witness and experience, or even just shooting into the sun at sunset on the west coast of the States. Shooting into the light is so difficult and so challenging. And you've got people who are out there doing it at the highest level, and it's hard. And I think that's the biggest, the type of thing that you and I do, single exposure work, more intimate scenes, not so many skies in our photographs, things like that. The challenges are less in many ways. And it's years since I photographed into the sun at the coast, because it's really hard. So
Yeah, yeah.
so going to a location and struggling with all of those things, I can understand why people might think, well, I went there and spent all my time, and the sky was lousy, but I can make it look amazing. With a little help from AI, I can totally understand why people do it. And I think the biggest issue really is the whole concept of, I think the expression that was used most when I've talked about other ethical things in the past is, people talk about an implied contract of trust between the viewer and the person who created the photograph, for want of a better word, using the word photograph or the image. There is an implied trust that the person witnessed the thing that they're presenting, or a close approximation of that. And that trust, I think, has been eroded. You get people coming up to you and asking, well, did you put that fog in? I say, well, no, it was foggy, when I took the photograph. So I think that's the only real issue,
Yeah,
but it's
and I
only
think,
really on social media.
yeah, and I think when you do, like, because you might not do that, and then if you do it once, then you've pretty much blown it for yourself. Because after that, if you say, okay, I'm just going to do it this once, and then if you tell people that, then all of a sudden they'll look at all your other photographs and think, well, did he do it for those photographs as well? I mean, you've lost all kind of integrity in what you're trying to sell people here. I mean, I try not to. I mean, I think I can't think of any images where I've deceived people on purpose.
No,
um, but
I
no,
honestly, I think you're more of a rarity. I wouldn't say that you're, I wouldn't say the majority. Well, maybe that's unfair of me, but maybe that's just my circles of people who I generally know in the business. I think you're particularly ethical.
try to be. I think. I mean, when you're talking about going out and folk going trying to get the epic shot and set the standard pretty high. It's like you said, it's a really hard type of photograph to take, and if that's your only goal, then you burn out really quickly. Because I've known a few photographers that just don't do it anymore because they were always chasing the image,
Hmm.
and they just ended up getting burnt out because they just could not keep up with what was being produced by other photographers, and because I mean the bar is so high. You
Yeah.
go on social media. I mean, I go on there all the time, and you see these images. You go, oh, that's just incredible, and these bars are set so high that most people cannot achieve that type of
Yeah.
photography. But then you think to yourself, well, did they go out there, or is that something that they've produced?
Yeah.
So it's always that nagging question behind, and I'd like to think that they just went out there and they got amazing light or whatever it happens to be, but who knows?
I think, the takeaway message that I'd like the viewers, if we have any still watching, is to kind of take away to take away from this is that my personal opinion, the expressive photography approach is that being in the landscape is a good thing to do. But your approach of being in the landscape and appreciating that what is left of the Canadian old growth forest, for example, is a precious thing to go and do and experience anyway. And the photography for me is very much a byproduct of just being there. I don't
Yes.
go out that often to actually make photographs. Most of the time, I'm just going out and I happen to have my camera with me. And if I find something that I really want to make a photograph of, then I will make a photograph of it, or spend some time with a scene. And whether I process the images or not is quite often irrelevant. It's just the experience of engaging, I think. And I do think that when we look through the viewfinder of a camera, that we do shut off the rest of the world. And there's an awful lot that we want to shut off at the moment. So I think that act of just being out there and being in nature and slowing down and taking deep breaths of fresh air is a really great thing to do. And I don't think that's going to change. Now, what we do with those raw files after the effect, depending on, obviously, you've got tens of thousands of subscribers on YouTube and your Instagram and so forth. So you've got a certain degree of influence. So when you post something, thousands of people are seeing it and thousands of people are liking and commenting and stuff like that on it. And but most people don't. You know, most people might have 100 or a couple of hundred followers on social media, and most of those are going to be friends or acquaintances and things like that.
Sure.
So, if they want to, I think it just boils down to if they get pleasure sitting in front of, if they don't get any pleasure sitting in front of the computer for 20 hours to produce a masterpiece of perfection, like some of these photographers do, if they don't want to do that and they can sit in front of a computer for 20 minutes and produce something that they really like with the help of AI, and maybe 30 people are going to see it, I don't really see much harm with that. I think the people who have the most responsibility are the people with the huge followings, because they obviously have all this influence over huge numbers of people and tend to set the trends. So I think that's more of my approach.
And I mean, this. AI approach, where you just put in keywords and all that, who knows? It may just fade away. I mean, it won't completely fade away, but it was kind of like NFTs. You know, NFTs. Everybody was jumping on the bandwagon, and there's still a lot of people that do NFTs. But there was an awful lot of people that just jumped on the bandwagon because they just wanted to make a bunch of money quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but these trends, it was kind of like the HDR photography. You know, that was a big trend for a while. Everybody was doing HDR. And then there's me and other photographers just plodding along doing the same old stuff that we always do. And you know, it's, you know, it's consistent, you know, it's just being consistent in what you believe in, and how you like to produce your photographs. I've seen some amazing AI art. I mean, you still have to have creativity to be able to produce that stuff. You still need an eye, and you still need to be able to figure out composition and stuff. But I guess, what you don't need is you don't need to be skilled in, say, drawing or painting or whatever it happens to be, because the computer will do it for you, you know.
I think the other big issue that we have is, you know, that, I mean, you and I both live in beautiful places. You know, within 20 minutes, half an hour of your house, you can be out in the woods beside a beautiful waterfall, you know, up to your neck in snow in the winter, you know, and I live a stone's throw from a huge oak forest, you know, so we're very lucky that we can get out into nature pretty much whenever we want. But there's lots of people who can, you know, and with a very
Right.
with a very small price of entry, they can have access to landscapes in a way, you know, they can have that experience. And I think that's something we, you know, I think it's really easy for us to, you know, with our tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and getting paid to be in the landscape, it's very easy for us to take that kind of high horse approach of, well, you know, people shouldn't do
Sure.
X and people shouldn't do Y, you know, but we're not the majority by any stretch either. You know, the most people don't have
Hmm.
what we have in terms of that. So I think at the end of the day, it's like anything, you know, it's like the internet. You know, you can use the internet for incredible stuff, or you can use the internet to scam old ladies out of their last, you know, out of their pensions. It's
Sure.
any tool is just in the hands of the user, and it's up to each of us, I think, to find that moral point where we feel comfortable with what we're doing.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, there are some parts of AI that I like, the new erase tool on Photoshop, and we were talking about this earlier. I mean, it's
Yeah.
incredible, and it does do, because you know, there would be times where I'd spend tons of time trying to clone something out, and you just couldn't get it quite right. But now it does a pretty good job of that. And
Yeah.
then I was talking to you earlier, the beta version of Photoshop. If you use the AI, or what's it called? You know, you put in keywords and all
Oh,
that
the
kind of stuff.
generative
And
AI.
yeah,
The
the
generative.
generative. You can use. I've been using that as well to clone out areas, because it'll actually give you a selection.
Yeah.
So sometimes it doesn't do it right, but it'll give you three different versions, and you can go, oh, well, that one looks the best. And really, I'm just using it to, like, there's areas perhaps when I'm photographing a forest and there's a big white patch that I want to kind
Mm.
of hide up
Yeah.
a little bit. So I'll use a bit of AI in there to plunk some branches in there or something,
I,
you
I,
know.
I I didn't I
But
didn't
that's
know you
pretty
were
good.
I didn't know you were faking it these days, buddy.
Well, it's funny because the other day I tried to I had an image of some redwoods and I wanted to put a Sasquatch in there, so I wanted to see how well it would do. So I typed in Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and it just looks weird. It didn't look like Sasquatch at all. And then I thought, oh, I'll type in beautiful woman. So I typed in beautiful woman, and there was this woman like kind of leaning up against a tree, but it looked like Obama's wife, Michelle Obama. So it was just the weirdest thing.
Oh well, she's a beautiful woman though.
Yeah, I know, but it was just weird.
Well,
And her
you
eyes
know,
were all wonky, and
all right. Well, that's unfortunate. So in terms of
Well, I'm trying it out. I mean,
yeah, of course, and I'm doing the same. I'm doing the same. I'm trying the thing out. You know, not because I want to to use it particularly, because I want to know what it does. But one of the things,
sure,
just in
sure.
terms of closing off, then, I mean, obviously we're started this thing with the question, you know, is AI going to be the death of landscape photography? One word, yes or no?
No, I don't think so.
That was 4 words.
No.
I tend to agree. I don't see photography is not going anywhere, and I think, like I said before, all of these tools, you know, they can be used for bad things and they can be used to mislead people. And yeah, I think the more worrying stuff is like video fake, you know, the fake videos. That is really
Yeah.
concerning. You know, where you get a phone a FaceTime from your wife and it's not your wife. You know, that type of stuff is going to get really really
Yeah.
alarming. So I think we'll end this video on the worst possible case scenario of how bad things could get. Um, like I said, if you enjoy this content, give us the old thumbs up, subscribe, bell notification, and that goes for Adam's channel as well. Adam's a fantastic photographer and makes incredible video content. Um, and is generally a wonderful guy to hang out with, which is why I do it all the time. So if you want to join us, come and join us in Spain, or if that's too far afield for you, come and join us in Vancouver Island in April 2024. All the details are on both of our websites. But thank you very much for making it this far into the video, and we really appreciate it. So thanks very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Alistair. Bye,
No
everyone.
worries, man. Chat soon. Bye.